What is an actual agent? So, an agent is a system that can decide what to do next to achieve a goal. Now, agents in and of themselves are not necessarily new. We've had agents for a long time. For example, let's go back to the Google Flights example that we had before. You could actually set a trigger inside of Google Flights that says, if that flight falls below a certain level, go ahead and buy my airline tickets. Cool. Now, that is an agent. Now, how is that different from agentic AI? Because it was rules based. If this, then that. But philosophically, it's still doing what you asked it to do. Let me give you another example to understand that. A number of years ago, when the very first Harry Potter book came out, it was very, very popular. So it was around Christmas time, and a lot of parents were trying to get the book from Amazon. The problem was it kept selling out. So what some parents did is they created an agent, and that agent polled Amazon. Essentially, it said, Amazon, is the book ready? No. Is the book ready? No. Is the book? So it kept asking every few seconds whether or not the book was available. Well, Amazon got annoyed because it was tapping into their infrastructure. And what did? They blocked the agent. Well, the agent figured it out and figured out a way around that. See, it had a goal and it figured out how to execute that goal. So what an agent can do is to break down the goal into steps, figure out what tools to work, verify if it worked, and if it doesn't, bring a human into the loop and remember what it did over time. Now, this is not general intelligence. Keep in mind, these agents are acting in very narrow contexts. It doesn't mean it's on autopilot. It has to have constraints on it. It can definitely be wrong, and it'll be confident about being wrong as well. And it's never a replacement for governance, security, and accountability, meaning we're not taking the human out of the loop. All right, so we know where it comes from. We know kind of how agents work. Let's get a little bit more specific. How does an agentic AI actually work? It's a 5-step process. Let's step through these 5 steps. Step 1, agentic AI begins by understanding the task. What it does is before it acts, it takes the request, it frames it, and then it confirms the boundaries under which it operates. So you're going to say, here's the goal. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's the constraints. Here's what you need to use. Here's the ambiguity. And before beginning, agentic AI will make sure that it understands what it's trying to do. So at that point, it then steps away from that interaction with you and it breaks that goal into a series of subtasks and it figures out what it needs to, tools it needs to accomplish the task. It then says what level of autonomy. Now remember, I said, we're not simply saying that this should be autonomous on its own. You can have different levels of autonomy. Now, there's a couple levels we'll get into, but for example, you could say, I suggest you do this. Do you want me to do that? Or you could say, do it, just tell me what you did. Or don't do anything, just make suggestions for what I should do. So there's different levels of autonomy here. Now, the cool thing about AI as well is as with time, it's going to be able to anticipate why something will fail and tell you why it's failed. So behind the scenes, what AI is doing is figuring out the plan. What tools do I need? What do I need to do? In what order do I need to do them? Step 3, do it. Calling the tools, using these APIs, figuring out how to do. Now, for all of you in cyber, you're sitting there thinking about the cyber risk for sure, I'm sure, right? But agentic AI tends to follow the least privilege principle, which is only give it what it needs in order to execute. If you use AWS, for example, an agent could be another user with certain types of credentials and certain type of roles or responsibilities for it to execute that you can set for it. It's going to go ahead and execute it, and it's going to go about giving you a log of what it accomplished. If it fails, it's going to figure out how to overcome that. Unless it can't, in which case it's going to bring the human back into the loop again. So you told it what to do. It's figured out how to do it. It's now executed. Step 4, did it do it correctly? So it's going to validate that against why you asked it to do it. And make sure that you did it correctly. Make sure that it's accurate. You can even ask it for like a confidence to say, how confident are you that you did what you're supposed to do? And you're going to get a report. The agent is going to check, Did I just do what you asked me to do? Now, what if I'm wrong? Cool. At that point, it's going to either revise the plan or it's going to escalate it to a human. It's going to, if there's actions which are maybe irreversible, like making a huge commitment to on a payment, it will stop there and to make sure that it's right. It's going to learn. It's going to adjust to reality. It's going to involve the human when it's needed, and it's going to make sure that it completes this responsibly. Now, why is agentic AI such a big deal right now? And the reason is the tools. Without the tools, we have to keep AI embedded in text. With the tools, we can move beyond the text to actually complete the workflow. Now, the downside, there's more capability, there's more risk. So we have to make sure that we keep permission structures in place that we can make sure that the agents are acting correctly. So some examples, I can use email, calendars, CRM, ticketing systems, database, analytics, document. Any API or any tools that you can think of can be used within the context of agentic AI in order for it to execute the workflow that you need to accomplish. So I gave you the example of an email. I gave you the example of Google Flights. Let's take it one step further and let's talk about an agentic AI in action, and let's see what happens with our 5 steps. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but one of the biggest struggles that I have is scheduling meetings. You have 5 different people and you're trying to figure out, how do I get all these people at the same time in the same place? And we have these big doodle polls and you spend all this time figuring out pros and cons of this person versus that person. And then you got to do an agenda and they have to do an email. And oh my, we know how much work this is. Well, why not use an agent? All right, agentic AI, I want you to go out and check all the calendars and tell me when we should meet. Based on that, schedule an agenda, send them the email with options, create the calendar event, update the CRM. You see how agentic AI could actually be designed in a way to take the friction off of this approach. Imagine AI going into the calendars and where that have people blocked off, finding the commonality between 5 people, then schedule that meeting, putting on everyone's calendars, understanding context enough to know what that meeting is about, creating an agenda for you and emailing it then to you. Think about what the impact of that to you and your efficiency and your productivity. Now, you're no longer focusing on those day-to-day mundane tasks. You're now focusing on those higher level tasks. But also think about that deeper. What tools are we requiring? I'm requiring to use multiple email platforms, potentially, if they're not the same as mine, multiple calendaring systems. I need to be able to understand who the client is. So I may need to go into my Salesforce instance to get information about the client. I may need to look at notes from other people about this client as well. So you can start to unwrap the complexity involved with this as well. And that's a very easy example. What if we go even further? What if we have to have multiple agents? Well, that's going to require more roles. And so the way that organizations are thinking about agentic AI is by creating very narrow agents focused on very specific use cases. So, for example, what if you're creating an app or an AI solution focused on health? You could have one agent that focuses on understanding a question that a person would have about their health. You could have another one focused just on diabetes. So you can break down it into a series of very small agents, and you can create these multi-agent teams. All right. So, for example, if I'm sure you're like in your job, your VPs or your executives will say, go do research on a new market or a go-to-market strategy. Well, you can have a research agent that does that. You could then, not only that, but you could create another agent that then takes all that information and creates reports based upon it. They say, well, ChatGPT does that. Oh, it does. But imagine if your use cases were even more narrow so that it could actually understand it at a deeper level. It could check, you have a verification agent checking for if it's right or wrong. You can have an execution agent. So you can see, just like we design your organizations by separation of roles and responsibilities, we're doing the same thing with AI. Think about AI a bit differently. We tend to think about our organization structures in terms of division of labor, right? Accounting does that, marketing does this. Start to think about AI in the same way and agents in the same way. This agent does this agent does that. Why? because then you can repurpose that agent for multiple purposes as well. It's reusable. So what we're talking about is orchestrating an entire organization based upon agents. It's almost like creating a project team where you have to have someone in charge of research, someone's a writer, someone's in charge of quality. Same thing here, breaking it down into a series of smaller tasks. Now, what are the different stacks, the technologies that relate to agentic AI? Now, I'm not going to take ownership over this. I'm actually thought this was pretty cool. This actually came from OpenAI and ChatGPT. As I started to put together this presentation and talk about the layering, they created this for me, which I was impressed with and just had to brag about that for a moment. So what are the technologies that go into the agentic AI stack? Let's talk about them one at a time. The first is, how does work enter the agentic AI? The way that it enters is maybe through a chat, through a form, through email, through Slack, through voice, through a dashboard. All those are ways, and just like traditional AI, but look, we're expanding it further because we're not simply saying it has to only be chat or an interface. Now we're opening it up to other types of platforms as well. It can be scheduled, it could be event-driven, schedule. Let's say you run a hotel, for example. We know that about 3 or 4 in the morning, we have to close the books, we have to reopen the books. It happens every night. I can schedule an agentic AI system to run at a specific time to execute that. It could be event-driven. Once this happens, then do that. And you're saying, well, that sounds like a rule. You could automate it based on conditions. So all those are the triggers that start agentic AI. Once the trigger occurs, the agent is going to frame the task, figure out what it needs, and ask you what it's allowed to do or not allowed to do. As you're designing your agentic AI, you want to make this as clear as possible so the agent knows when it should step in. All right, so we know when I should start. What else do I need to do? Well, I need to orchestrate this. So let's say that you go into Gen AI and you say, write an email that does X, Y, Z. You're going to know that an agentic AI system is going to say, well, I need an email platform, I need a Gen AI platform, I need all those platforms. So the second part is orchestration. An agent for orchestration is going to figure out what tools and what agents need to do what and in what order they need to do it. We have a policy in there that's going to say, here's how it should happen, and we're going to determine how level of autonomy. You're going to set this up beforehand so that it's going to operate based upon the conditions you give to it. And you can give it limits. If you're afraid, only execute this 10 times or 15 times. Here's when you stop. Here's when the human should be consulted. Orchestration prevents it from running autonomously without your intervention. Next level. So we see we need triggers, we need orchestration, we need a model. Now, one of the cool things about this as well is maybe you don't use ChatGPT. Maybe you want to use Azure. Maybe you want to use Copilot. Maybe you use Claude. You can determine which Gen AI system you want to use. But it has to be able to understand what to do and break into the subtask and know what tools to choose as well. So the model is really the agent. The reliability, however, comes from all the agents around it. All right, the next element here in our stack, number 4, tools. These is where we go about doing what we said. CRMs, ERPs, emails, calendars. I integrate that with API or webhooks or SQL. I can even say I can only read my database, or I can write to the database, or I can execute it. What we're focusing on here is actually taking those actions. So we have triggers, we have orchestrations, we have models, we have tools. What else do we need? Memory. We need to remember what we asked to do. Remember, we have agents that are doing a series of different things, and we're orchestrating them. Well, someone's got to remember if we're doing the right thing. So we need to have short-term memory to make sure that the agent's doing what it's supposed to, that one agent is, but you also need long-term memory that makes sure that we're learning over time all those workflow patterns. And if I ask you, agentic AI, how are things going, you need to be able to figure that out and personalize it based upon the question I'm asking of it. So without keeping in mind this memory and this state, agent's just going to reset and do the same thing every time and not learn. So we have to have memory. And again, that's the difference between rules-based expert systems and agentic AI. Remember, rules-based AI just executed if X, then Y. Here we're learning, because what can happen over time with agentic AI is I can find that maybe I need to do things differently, and I can learn and adapt. The last element of agentic AI is logging, auditing, and monitoring. I need to be able to keep track of what went well, what didn't go well, why did it go well, not go well, test it out, audit it, and figure out to make sure, is it reliable? All right, so these are the 6 different aspects of agentic AI. So how do they work in practice? Let's have an example. Let's pretend you work in IT. And we all know that if you have an IT problem, you put a ticket in. Well, let's pretend we're using agentic AI. The interface, the ticket arrives. So someone's having a problem with their computer. That triggers an agent. The agent says, all right, let me look at this request. How much of a priority is? What is our policy? Now, we all know that there's a difference in the different types of IT system tickets we put in. You being locked out of your account for your email is different than my computer's not working, or it's different than some other problem, like I need to get new software installed on my computer. That orchestration engine is going to analyze the request, figure out how important it is, and then figure out what to do about it. The model will then plan out the steps to take. The tools will then figure out what APIs or what tools need to be put out. Memory, we need to keep track of the steps we've taken, and we need to log them as well. So we can see here how all of these 6 different elements of agentic AI all work together.